Welcome to Dev Diary, the series where I try to make my own video games, and today we're finally trying to tackle something from like 20 years ago. We are of course talking about Okami, specifically the celestial brush mechanic. Now, if you're not familiar with this mechanic, the basic idea is that the player can draw shapes in-game using their controller, and it would affect the actual game based on the shape drawn. And it did multiple things, like you could do an attack, or summon an item. It's honestly an interesting concept, and one that I'm surprised hasn't been used more, although after today, I might know why. So this is our mini version of Okami. We've got our own little slug dog looking version of Amaterasu, which can run around in typical top-down fashion, and right-clicking will summon our less impressive version of the celestial brush. While the player is holding right-click, their mouse movement is recorded to a list for the duration of the event. Once the timer runs out or the player releases right-click, we move on to trying to figure out what the player drew. Now, I'll be honest, we only have 3 options: line, circle, and special line. And to summarize this whole thing, it's basically a process of elimination. Is the beginning point and the end point far enough that it could be a line? Otherwise, it's likely a circle because of the whole closed nature of a shape. Now, if it's potentially a line, a distance check is made to confirm that a line was meant to be drawn. And if it's a circle, we keep track of the overall shape and again, determine based on those measurements if it's close enough to a circle. And then the third and final variant, that special line, well, that's more of like a safeguard in case the shape doesn't quite make a line, but also isn't quite a circle. And this third option really only kind of exists for the same reason that we only read lines and circles. Reading players' inputs is hard, and anything more complicated than these 2 checks required mathematical knowledge way beyond my ability. For example, the circle check, the player can get similar results by drawing a square. And as we'll see in a bit, when in the middle of the action, the circle read is just not accurate enough. Instead, circles are often recognized as special lines. Now, don't get me wrong, it was extremely motivating to get this far, but given how much math knowledge is likely required to do anything more, that's probably about as far as we're ever gonna get. But that's okay, you know? Silver lining, we still have something to apply to a game here. Lines produce slashes that look like they leave a pretty nasty gash, and when the circles are actually red, the booms are definitely devastating. And the special lines, well, you'll see. So let's get some bad guys going in this second half of the project, which was to turn Okami into a bullet heaven / survivor-like. Now look, I know, we've done so many survivor-likes on the channel, but on the bright side, I'm actually getting a lot better at making survivor-likes. Not to toot my own horn or anything. So we have 2 basic enemy types here. A typical chaser who will hurt the player with their dangerous touches of doom, and an orange blight who would rather hurt the player from afar with their projectiles. Speaking of which, the player also has their own projectile, which is actually their primary way of fighting. See, similar to Okami, the player can only summon the celestial brush if they've got the ink, and this can be kept track of at the top left along with player health, experience amount, and a dash count. Indeed, the player can also dash to temporarily avoid the swarm, but obviously it's on a cooldown, so players should remember to dash wisely. Ink pots are also regenerated over time. Originally, the player was going to have to pay to refill pots with ink dropped by enemies, hence why enemies explode into bursts of ink. But it was overly complicated and kind of annoying to switch between gaining experience and refilling the ink pots. So instead, the system was streamlined and ink pots now recover over time on their own. This as a result makes the usage of the celestial brush much more important, and where I started to learn a great deal of things. First, there is a reason that the action comes to a halt in Okami when the brush comes into play. Trying to draw while the action is going on at full pace is a nightmare. Unfortunately, by the time I realized this, it was too late. So you remember how hard it was to draw bombs normally? Well, doing it while trying to avoid damage and the chaos of a survivor's like makes it at least 10 times worse. But again, when a bomb is successfully drawn in the middle of a crowd of baddies, oh, is it satisfying. Now, while the bomb is pretty straightforward, our line slash is a bit different. The line slash doesn't actually hurt the enemies, instead it simply knocks them back or away depending on their position to the slash attack. Also, see these big guys? They're usually invulnerable to the player's attacks, unless they're slash. This opens them up, literally, to taking damage. They're also the only enemy who drops health, so yeah, they're pretty important to deal with. And finally, we have the special line. The special line acts as a barrier to enemy projectiles, so any enemy projectiles that touch this line will be reflected. Now, of course, in Survivors-like fashion, defeating enemies and collecting their ink will help the player level up. And we've got a pretty typical list of attributes to invest in. Things like move speed and max health, but also more specialized stuff like pot recovery time and amounts of dashes that the player can do before having to wait for the cooldown. Again, nothing too crazy here, but under the hood, I've finally figured out a way to make these Survivor-like systems much easier to manage. So again, silver lining. Overall though, this was less satisfying than I was hoping. Mostly due to the fact that the trying aspect had to be scaled way back because of my lack of math knowledge, but also because of oversights that kind of ruined the experience at the same time. You know, like not slowing slash pausing time during drawing. A really annoying and really embarrassing oversight. However, I do think that this idea still has potential. Maybe not as a Survivors like, maybe more as like a Dynasty Warriors thing. All I know is that I think that this idea could be done better, but it requires a mind greater than my own to accomplish it. But, you know, what do you think? Does this idea have potential, or is this all just crazy talk? As always, I'd love to hear from y'all, so be sure to share your thoughts in the comments. While you're at it, if you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like, and if you'd like to support the channel further, I am on Patreon, and of course, maybe subscribe if you're new to the channel. With that said, brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.